Welcome, everybody, to the second in the series of Just Peace Dialogues that are co-hosted by the Desmond and Leah Tutu Legacy Foundation and the Ukrainian Association of South Africa, and today in partnership with the Daily Maverick. We're thrilled to be joined by some extraordinary panelists today for our discussion, and hope to really have an engaging conversation with you, our audience online. It's so lovely to see all of the hellos coming in from all over the world. So if you want to say hello, share where you're from, and keep your eyes open and share questions as they come to you. So my name is Janet Jobson. I'm the CEO of the Desmond and Leah Tutu Legacy Foundation. And we really are engaging in this work of the Just Peace Dialogues with the Ukrainian Association of South Africa, because we feel really drawn into giving voice to what we knew the Arch would do, which is to stand against injustice anywhere. And in particular, our aim is to try and create platforms and find ways to share the common humanity between the people of South Africa and the African continent and Ukrainians, to build a platform of global human solidarity in the face of, in our first conversation where we were joined by Grasa Michel and Ukrainian activist Miroslav Marinovich and Oleksandra Matvichuk, also from the Center for Civil Liberties, we really explored this question of global human solidarity. But today we want to dive into the example of our three extraordinary panelists on what it takes to embody the leadership of moral courage in a time in which it's very challenging to stand up against injustice. And so I'll quickly introduce our panelists to give you a sense of each of them and the perspective they'll be bringing. For our South African audience, you'll be no strangers to Dr. Phumzile Mlambo-Ngcuka. She's our former deputy president and most recently the former executive director of UN Women, a truly powerful exemplar of African leadership for us here at home and around the world. So welcome to you, Dr. Phumzile.
Hi.
Then our next panelist is Ilya Ponomarev, and I apologize for any mispronunciations.
That's fine.
We're particularly thrilled to have. And then our final and equally extraordinary, if not more extraordinary panelist is Oleksandra Romantsova. Oleksandra joins us from the Center for Civil Liberties in Ukraine, in Kyiv. And the Center for Civil Liberties, she's executive director, and they've just been awarded 2 weeks ago the 2022 Nobel Peace Prize for their extraordinary work documenting the war crimes that are happening in Ukraine. So welcome to you, Sasha.
Thank you, real honor to be here.
What we really want to do in this dialogue is create a space to reflect collectively on the question of what it takes to stand up against injustice, and particularly to stand up in situations where it's not so easy to have the courage to speak out, where it's not so easy to take particular stands on behalf of humanity. You know, we always have the example of the Arch in our minds here at the Tutu Legacy Foundation, in which we really see that he stood up on every issue of injustice, wherever people's dignity and their value as human beings was being infringed. There you would find the Arch speaking up, whether it was on climate change or on poverty, whether it was in support of the people of Palestine, or whether it was against gender-based violence or any issue. The question of that concept of moral courage in our minds as we go into this conversation today with our three extraordinary panelists. And maybe, Dr. Phumzile, to start with you, it would be really powerful to hear from you. You've been outspoken about the impact of the war on women and children in particular, and on global food supplies. But you've also held a number of positions and been an activist in your own right against the apartheid, the apartheid regime and the oppression of the apartheid state. And so I guess it would be really interesting to hear from you and all of your leadership experience, and in this current time, where do you find the moral courage to speak out about issues and to take the stands that you've taken in your life?
Thank you very much, and good afternoon to the audience and to the colleagues on the panel. I mean, we are living at a time where it looks like a everything that can go wrong has gone wrong. And there is no luxury and opportunity to sit back and be uninvolved and not make sure that your voice is raised. But at the same time, balance that, be loud so that there is other people that you are reaching out to who may not have thought to themselves that this is the time to take a stand. So really, the courage that I master sometimes has a lot to do with the need to reach out to other people so that you increase the circle of concerned people, because solidarity is meaningful when there's more of you. So this constant trying to build up the people who are taking a stand is important. I think in the case of Ukraine, for us in South Africa here, it is important that people are aware that even though we're far away and maybe our influence is not that significant, but we have to constantly mobilize the humanitarian assistance, for instance, as well as to call on the aggressor to hold back to the extent that than the men in arms. So we have a moral responsibility to point that out and to continue to stand on the side of women, because we want to make sure that the women are not a footnote in the conflicts, that their pain is also being highlighted and that their pain is also known and is acted upon.
Thank you, Dr. Phumzile. It's such a powerfully made point. And I'm reflecting on the article that you wrote, that really making sure that we understand the depth of the victimization of particularly women and children who are sort of absent from the front lines of the conflict, in the sense of being directly involved in the war itself, but who are largely fleeing, who've had to leave their families, who've had their whole lives torn apart. Really, really important to remember that sort of fundamental humanity. I guess maybe, Oleksandra, Sasha, it's useful to maybe turn to you. Part of the work of the Center for Civil Liberties has been documenting violent and disruptive and difficult experience for the people of Ukraine. How have you and the Center really taken on that leadership role in telling the story of the Ukrainian people at this time?
We started to do that in 2014. It's really neat to understand that Russian Federation started aggression not only 24 February of this year, but it started much earlier. And exactly all of this started from occupation of Crimea Peninsula, and after this part of Donbas, it's a region in Ukraine. So from 2014, that was occupied near to 7% of territory of Ukraine. But for understanding that both of this region was more have biggest population of Ukraine. So together in Ukraine, we have 49 million of people. And there, for example, in Donbas region, that was 6 million people. In Crimea, that was 2 million people. And it's really, we really leave them really, compact. So a lot of people feel that they daily life, that something changed, that people with gangs coming to their territory and told about that we will have other orders here. So we started documented war crimes from Crimea, but after this, exactly, this territory was closed for us. Any human rights defenders with the Ukrainian past, the military base. Main goal of Russia Federation keep territory of Crimea because it's strategically ideal place for put the gangs there and exactly create a scare of these military arms to the Europe, to the America, and to the Great Britain. So it's not because some people want to be in Russia Federation, because nobody knows exactly. We don't have so-called referendum. We don't have any understanding how many people, for example, think about that. But even they think about that, we have like law procedure. So you need to go to parliament with this idea, take a law, and of this, it's sure possible. Same like, for example, in Great Britain or Italy, which have some referendum after changes of the legislation in their questions. So it's about Crimea, first of all. But Crimea, because of in that moment, Ukraine was after revolution of dignity, our president escaped, our minister of internal affairs escaped. So nobody can give the order to protect, for example, this territory. But I think even our army was not prepared for that, because in that moment, our army was less than our police, for understanding by even numerically this territory. And human rights defenders have a possibility to go there to document war crimes and human rights violation. And need to understand that in that moment, population don't have so high level trust for official structure, because in so-called Donbass, police and so-called military structure support these people with gangs who coming from Russia territory, and so they not believe officials. They believe only human rights defenders, same peoples like them. So they bring their story only for human rights defenders, and we collect them whole the 8 years. We create coalition which called Justice for Peaceful in Donbass, which 70 organizations do that. We studying whole the previous case studying with we going to Balkan countries. We speak a lot with Latin America. And same Africans organization could give us their experience, because before we don't have any. And so all of this we collect 8 years, but 24 February changed the situation, because it's full invasion, full it's a huge numerous of forces who coming from different direction, and a lot of need to understood that Ukraine is hold the covering by internet. Each person in Ukraine have some kind of telephone. Each third person have smartphone, so connection with internet. So population start to be biggest sources of what happened inside. It's not that was not access to media or journalists. It's doing just your neighbors, your colleagues, your people from which you know from different regions. And here we have two different waves. One of these waves that was releasing north part of Ukraine from Russian forces. They was kicked out. They bring together with them civilians, hostages, and now we're trying to find them in the jails in the territory of Russia Federation. Exactly this give far from. So our field missions, it's volunteers and human rights defenders. We are going to each village in Kiev region. It's quite big place. And same, we create coalition tribunal for Putin. This coalition covering its human rights defenders from each region of Ukraine. We have 24 regions of Ukraine, even occupied territory. We have grassroots sources who give us information from there. And human rights defenders collect all this information in database. Now in our database, 24,000 cases, potential war crimes. We understood that only court will given them like finally characteristic like war crimes. So potential war crimes, because we have this experience 8 years. We support our general prosecutor office who do that in the state level. They have more than 58,000 cases. And we collaborate with international investigators who are working now from International Criminal Court, from Moscow Mechanism OSCE, from a special investigation mission from Council of Human Rights of UN. all of these international partners collaborate with us, and prosecutor system can manage it so quick. So that's why people trying to support, bring all the evidence, testimony, and human rights defenders have the experience, collect this, all of this, and put in the special database for methodology, which will be open. So for us, really clear that all of this happened because previously war crimes which Russian Federation providing not only in territory of other countries like Georgia or Moldova, but same in the territory of Russian Federation, like in Chechnya, and same in Syria and other countries. So all of this like growing because justice is not coming there in that time. So that's why it started possible. So full invasion in Ukraine and total war, which now happened in our region. So this principle of UN for justice for all, court system and access for that for all the nation in the world, all the people in the world, it's here. It's just you think of Black Lives Matter in the US, where it's people with cell phones who are able to show the racial injustice of how policing is happening. And then the importance of building coalitions of civil society organizations, of really strengthening a coalition base of civil actors as part of the sort of the base of building democratic practices and building accountability. And I think, here in South Africa, we think a lot about our civil society as almost one of the critical the critical tools in our toolkit of democracy. And so important to remind ourselves of how important civil society organizations are. But I also, reflecting on 2014 as almost a site of the beginning of a very sustained campaign of aggression. Ilya, to turn to you, I mean, you're Russian, you were a parliamentarian in Russia at the time, and certainly from where we sit in South Africa, we don't come across many Russians who've taken a stand against Putin or against the Russian government. So what led you to be
with him for quite some time? But I hope that your nation, your society will do certain research in that particular cases, and you will do the right choices for yourselves. Thank you very much for being able to take part at this conference, and especially thank you for being able to speak to South African audience. I never been in South Africa, but a lot of my core moral values actually were inspired by events in South Africa. When I was a kid, one of my favorite books was a book of famous French author Louis Boussinard, who was writing about events during Anglo-Boer War, and that was probably the first major anti-colonial fight on this planet. And I was very much inspired by the example of people who were standing against the largest at that time empire in the world, and managed to stand and put a fight for a very long time. When the war in Ukraine started in 2014, it first started as more a hybrid war, but I was absolutely certain that at one point in time it would move into the situation of open, full-scale military conflict, and unfortunately I was right, and that's what happened in February this year. And I myself, capital, and we were standing there without any sophisticated military equipment, but we had a spirit, and we knew what we were fighting for. And that's why we managed to kick them off Kyiv, and the most elite regiments in Russia were actually destroyed during the very first month of this war. Later, yes, we had more support from the West, and there is a popular myth which is being distributed in many countries in the world, that it was NATO from the very beginning who were equipping Ukraine with a very sophisticated equipment. That was not the case at all. And Ukrainians were fighting just with bare hands. And only when people in the United States and in continental Europe recognized that actually Ukraine is not going to fall in 3 days as they expected from the very beginning. Only then Ukraine started to be fighting against Russian army. And I am always replying that I am not fighting against Russian army. I am fighting against the modern day fascism. And what is totally unacceptable for me is the neutrality in this situation. And this another example that where my moral principles are very much inspired by South Africa. That's obviously the example of Nelson Mandela, who fought obviously probably hopeless fight for many years. But he prevailed because he was right. And he needed to stand on his principles. And right now, there are thousands of Russians who are here in Ukraine, who are fighting against Putin's invaders. And it's not just because they feel compassion for Ukrainians. No, because they feel that fascism has no nationality. And you cannot stay neutral. You cannot say, it's we need to think about our financial interests. We need to think about our well-being. No, it's something where you need to take side. And a classical authoritarian, corrupt, kleptocratic regime. It's all been based not on sort of principles. It's not even principles of imperialism. It's just the principles of greediness and corrupt money and corrupt politicians. They managed to waste all the resources that were coming from the oil and gas during 2000s just to stuff their own pockets, while the disparity in the nation was continued to grow. And it was this inequality which actually allowed this war to happen, because it was Putin who was telling Russians different fairy tales that you are so poor, not because of me and my cronies, but because of some West. And now we should fight against West in Ukraine, but it's just to cover his personal corrupt interests. And I think that the collapse of this regime will happen pretty soon. And everybody who is supporting this regime would feel sorry for this. The world is going to change. In this world, there would be no autocracies. I fully believe in this. We will live on the planet which would be driven by free societies. And right now, Ukraine is at the very forefront of this fight. And everybody who wants the free society for themselves should help it.
Thank you, Ilya, for that passionate response. I'm so struck by your reading of a book about the Anglo-Boer or South African War, as we term it, the Western Cape, with 8 million people out of 60 million, just because there's English speakers in the Western Cape, or because of some sort of old colonial West. So that reframing of it also as not the Russian government, but as a fascist government, that it's not the Russian people that you're standing against, but rather the move of fascism is particularly interesting, and also the mobilization of aggression as an attempt to cover up the corruption of a fascist state that is falling apart. I think in some ways in South Africa we see the economic discontent in our own country that results in violence on community levels, often what we're experiencing now against foreign nationals in South Africa, when that economic injustice is both because of a legacy of apartheid and is because of a wave of corruption that we've experienced in the past decade in South Africa. But I guess, Dr. Phumzile, we've seen on the comments many people sort of really struggling with the, I guess, the position of the South African government and with the question of for a stand against injustice. How do we find a way through sort of the morass that we have at the moment, both in the multilateral system and in South Africa itself? Oh, sorry, Dr. Phumzile, you're on mute. If you could just unmute yourself. We'll get there in a second. It should be at the top of your screen. Oh, not yet. It's a burning. We'll help you figure it out. I know people are burning to hear your response to that, but maybe if you just scroll, I think probably to the top of your screen, you should see the video and the little microphone next to it. And if you just click on that microphone, it should turn blue, and then we should be able to hear you. Maybe while we're waiting for Dr. Phumzile, maybe to either of you, I mean, Ilya and Sasha, there's sort of cynicism about what the UN can do.
War, but all the wars will happen around the world. It's hybrid war now. It's not so classic war with which international humanitarian law was answered before. So we need a new procedure, new mechanism, new agreement about a new category of war, because economic information, this part of war started to be same important like military battles in some fields. So that's why it's really important that UN make a lot of jobs, different kinds of tasks and challenges they covering, but they don't have now new mechanism. And it's, if we will back to beginning, exactly, Statute of UN, it's same Statute of OSCE, which working here in our region, or Council of Europe. So we need to back to this framework, which exactly putting the main missions, and after this again think about mechanism. So that's why we exactly propose a separate tribunal against crime of aggression, because International Criminal Court not covered it. But all what happened with Ukraine and whole what they doing with their own nation 20 years, they really push down all the human rights, all the freedoms, all the possibility people to have critical view to each their move. So all of this, we need to think about that. We need to create exactly system when such people will be punished, such people will be prosecuted, because they putting big nation, it's 140 million people in the war, and a lot of them even don't know about that. I'm sure that a lot of them don't have any mechanism, because last of 20 years to react for that. For Ukrainians, we decide for our solution. We don't want to be inside this empire. So for us, it's a new colony war, for example. We don't want to be colony of neighbors. We want to be normal neighbors. We want to be equal. We want to be partners, but we don't want to be colony, or we don't want to be part of empire, which we exactly don't want to be inside. We want to be independent and be normal democracy country. And exactly Statute of UN for us, it's model which we know how, because of the aggression against Ukraine, whole the world suffering, for example, of product question. It's really a high level food question, security now. And so it's happened like this, that victims of aggression, Russian aggression to Ukraine in this new colonial war, it's whole the world. mostly it's countries who need this food program support.
Yeah, I think that was the point so well made. Ilya, I'll first go to Dr. Phumzile. You know, in your op-ed, Phumzile, you know, about this global impact of this particular war. But it would be really helpful just to get your perspective on I guess, on the South African situation, but also on the UN's role in an attempt to try and resolve this conflict.
Yeah. Hello, can you hear me now?
Perfectly.
Yes.
Yeah, thanks. Well, I think the UN is in a difficult situation right now. For one, so many things are not going right in the world. And all of it this morning, the Ethiopian government reprimanding the UN Secretary General for saying there's a crisis in Ethiopia. I mean, who doesn't know that there is a crisis in Ethiopia? And for Africa, this is a big challenge on our doorstep. Because if something happens in Ethiopia, we will have a very serious situation that will affect the Horn of Africa, but the rest of Africa as well. Because, I mean, Ethiopia is more than 100 million people. So it's not a small thing, and all the countries around it are also very vulnerable. So if you take Ethiopia and you take Ukraine and the other wars that we have in the country, it just feels like we're in a third world war, actually. If you put all these conflicts together. And the sets of interventions that were set up for the UN at the end of the Second World War are not as applicable in the type of wars we have now. There is a need to go back to the drawing board with an aim of strengthening the way the UN and other actors by the war. When people are being dislocated and pushed out of their natural homes because of bombings, etc., and then they are being pushed out because of lack of water, hunger, etc., it's just a toxic cocktail that populations are missing. And again, I'll go back to women. I look at women and the kind of relief that the UN brings in situations like this, which is humanitarian. The women are in dire situation because their rights are being violated by the enemy. Their rights are being violated by men in general, including men from their own country. Women are being trafficked. They suffer sexual violence. They suffer gender-based violence. And even when there is a humanitarian catastrophe, such as the one that is caused by climate change, women suffer sexual violence in that situation. So for some reason, whenever there's a crisis, the answer of men towards women is to violate them. So that is a very, very distressful situation. Those countries remains very, very important. I don't think that we can expect the UN to have enough capacity to respond in the manner that is needed right now. The UN is just one of the entities that are there, but the UN needs help from all of us.
Thank you, Phumzile. I'm remembering there was a comment in the thread here of the chat mentioning that someone had donated to Gift of the Givers, an extraordinary South African organization that is also providing humanitarian relief in Ukraine. And I think back to 2 weeks ago, we hosted the Desmond Tutu International Peace Lecture, and our keynote speaker, the Deputy Secretary General, Amina Mohammed, almost asserting that that Africa has a role in the whole world, that we shouldn't be afraid of taking up space, that we are not helpless or hopeless, but we have a voice that we need to bring to the table, and that we should be bringing that powerfully to the table. But thank you also, Phumzile, just for reminding us of other conflicts, that we should always keep in mind human suffering and standing against fascism and autocracy. That's the point. That is what it means to stand against injustice wherever that is happening. Ilya, I know you wanted to jump in on the question of the role potentially of the UN or of multilateralism. Where is the solution? How do we find a way for global voices to really shift something in this conflict?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think that the reform of the United Nations, why UN is not so efficient about many other wars, like the war in Ethiopia, is because many great nations understand the inefficiency of this mechanism that results in underfunding and in increasing of bureaucracy within the organization, and as the result, its inability to act quickly, swiftly, and decisively. And I think that to reform UN, we need to do one major thing, is to increase the role of General Assembly, to give the General Assembly the ability to overrule the vetoes in the Security Council, and that would increase the role of other nations, not just the founding states of the United Nations. And secondly, what I think and what our future Russian government would definitely propose is, I think it's not fair that why Russia is occupying the permanent Security Council position, which belonged to the Soviet Union, means to all of the republics which consist of the former Soviet Union. I think it has to be put for the rotation, and that also would provide a lot of more balance in this regards, and that would be the proposal that would be put in front of the United Nations.
Very interesting proposal. So to really recognize that the Soviet Union as an entity was a combination of a number of, even abstaining from a General Assembly vote, where we saw, that the UN General Assembly's naming of apartheid as a crime against humanity was such a powerful tool in the struggle against apartheid and in the liberation of all of South Africa's people. And so, how do we make sense of the South African government's inability even to name the aggression as what it is? And what is it that we as South African people and citizens can do to almost shift the sentiment coming out of South Africa about how do we really shift that? How do we really grow an understanding that aggression cannot be tolerated?
Yeah, if I was in that position at the UN, I think I would not have abstained. I think it is important that South Africa, at a time when the heat was so much, is able to be part of garnering the strongest possible response towards the aggressor. At the same time, I see the need to keep an open line so that somebody continues to engage, lead to where we wanted to go towards. And there's still time for South Africa to review its place in the as it unfolds and engage differently.
Thank you, Dr. Phumzile. I'm conscious we've only got about 10 minutes left, and some of what's coming through on the chat is just a sort of a question of, well, what is it we can do, and maybe to just pose that particularly to you, Sasha, and to Ilya, which is what is it that ordinary South Africans can do in terms of participating in a global sort of solidarity for Ukrainians? What is it from your perspective that would be most valuable for us to be able to contribute in order to make our small contribution towards a positive outcome for the people of Ukraine?
I'm just started that ordinary people usually not understood how much power they have because exactly only population, only people have a power, and president, parliaments, or other, it's because we give them possibility to represent us or to make some rules or something like this. So this feeling, it's need to be just remembered about that, and you can support any person which you met from Ukraine. You can support just information to know more about the world. So find information, spread information, concrete information with investigation, with sources which you believe in, with journalists who you trust in. So all of this, it's part of resistance in this conflict between human rights values, which represent by Ukrainian defending, because we don't win a war. We stop war when we don't need to defend. We attack, we was attacked by Russian Federation. So we are not dreaming about that war. We don't want so many people from Ukraine side dying. We just dreaming about peaceful neighborhoods with normal country, which think about democracy and responsibility, first of all, for their own lives. Because for understanding, and Ilya in this can support me, I think that Russia Federation more attention putting for outside some impact than organization inside comfortable life for their own citizens. So have so many oil money, which not putting for development inside the country and putting for some fluent for outside more. So it's, as for us, it's only for that we need our principles. It's human rights principles, freedoms inside our own independent system with normal neighbors. That's why what we are want, and that's why we are fighting with Russian Federation, who proposed on the world and so big population like people in Africa and people in South Africa Republic. Thank you.
Thank you, Oleksandra. Ilya, your thoughts on what is it we can contribute as ordinary citizens?
There are different things that can be done, and there are different degrees of involvement. First of all, obviously, the simplest thing that everybody can do is financial donations, and there are different organizations which accept money for humanitarian purposes as well as for military purposes. And I am obviously calling people to donate for military purposes because I think that's the biggest and most impactful way to come to peace is right now to defeat the invaders. There are a lot of people who are just coming to Ukraine to join the fight. And Ukraine right now has the largest international legion, which Russian propaganda likes to call mercenaries. But I know a lot of those people personally. They came not to fight for money. They came to fight for the ideas. And we are very thankful for them. And as I said, there are many Russians who are fighting there as well. But probably the least, but nevertheless, extremely impactful thing that can be done is just stop doing business with Putin's cronies. There are a lot of them coming to South Africa, bloody bastards. And doing business with them is not decent. If you look behind me, you see the flag of the new Russia. And you may recognize that on the usual Russian flag, there are three colors: white, blue, and red. So the new generation of Russians and the new Russian opposition decided that our new Russian flag would be without blood. And don't let yours be soaked in blood.
Thank you, Ilya. Phumzile, maybe just a final word from you. I mean, as someone who's been an activist your whole life, what is it that you think the people of South Africa, ordinary South Africans, can and should be doing at this time in the face of this war?
Well, I think that South Africans must make their voices heard. directly to the authorities in South Africa, as well as in global solidarity with other people who are taking the positive stand in Ukraine. But also South Africans must link the fight in support of Ukraine with the fight in support of the Ethiopian people, which is another challenge that we face, because we have to make sure that we don't allow evil to prosper anywhere. We have to continuously fight for this mentality of war and killing of people and children and women anywhere in the world to be something that is unacceptable, something that we don't tolerate at any given point. We should not tire to speak out, to point out all of these injustices that we're seeing in our world, in Ukraine and everywhere else.
To cut through the disinformation and misinformation, to find out what's really happening, and to engage in the dreaming of a new way of being. Ilya, it's lovely to see the dream of a new Russia. It reminds me of almost the speech of Desmond Tutu standing at the height of apartheid, standing in front of a crowd of people saying, defying the logic of apartheid that said we must be separate, to say, no, we will be the rainbow people, we will be a new nation. And to almost hold on to that defiant hope as an act of resistance. So the hope for a new Russia as an act of resistance. And to really remind all of our viewers who've joined us, I think what's been powerful from each of you is both your personal example, that each of you has shown moral courage. Each of you has shown the role that individuals can play wherever you are to stand up against injustice, and that then there's enormous power in linking up our voices, that linking up the stands we take against injustice has real power in the world. And whether that's calling for sanctions and disinvesting from Russia, whether that's really standing in solidarity through working with humanitarian organizations, or just through taking a powerful stance publicly, it's really, really important that we hold on to our moral courage and hold on to the principle of valuing. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.